Good morning or good afternoon, everyone. Welcome. My name is Iwona, and in this presentation, I'll be walking you through the modern energy cooking in displacement settings based on the landscape study that we have recently conducted under the MECS humanitarian energy stream. We have analyzed modern energy cooking displacement settings by identifying the drivers and constraints for the transition from traditional biomass fuels to modern energy cooking. The aim of conducting this exercise was to inform the MECS program strategy and also open up a wider discussion within the humanitarian sector. Today, we'll walk you through some of our findings and present the identified 5 core priority areas of interest for the MECS humanitarian energy stream. Together with Seng, who co-leads the humanitarian and institutional workstream at MECS with Anne Tran, as well as with Aimee Jenks from the GPA and Owen Grafham from Chatham House, we will take you through some of the challenges and opportunities regarding MECS in displacement settings and present key findings from the conducted landscape study. First, Seng will provide a quick background on the MECS program and the humanitarian energy workstream, and Aimee will share some opening remarks. I will then take you through some of the top barriers and opportunities under the 3 themes: technology, stakeholders, and policy and finance. We will then present research priorities which we have identified through the study, and finally Owen will share some concluding remarks. Now over to Seng.
Hi, my name is Seng. I'm an Engineering for Development Research Fellow at Loughborough University, and I'm very pleased to be introducing to you the MECS program and our work on displacement settings. The Modern Energy Cooking Services program is a 5-year £40 million program funded by UK Aid. We aim to break out of business-as-usual approaches and accelerate the transition from biomass to clean cooking at a global scale. Through research partnerships, supporting innovation, supporting scale-up, and ensuring that no one is left behind. MECS draws on the knowledge and expertise of research partners across the globe, including in 15 priority countries in Africa and Asia, which were identified through an initial market assessment. We are working together to further understand progress and the transition to modern energy cooking services, taking advantage of new technological developments and price reductions, generating new knowledge on how to scale up the transition and transformations by putting them into practice in collaboration with private sector partners, and strengthening the monitoring of global progress in order to influence at the policy level. The work in humanitarian settings began in January 2020 under the Humanitarian and Institutional Portfolio, which is co-led by Dr. Anne Tran and myself. Dr. Iwona, Bisaga and I focus on the humanitarian work, where we have 3 work packages: understanding transition pathways for modern energy cooking services in displacement situations, technology, innovation and delivery models, and capacity building and scale-up.
Thank you, Seng, and hello and welcome to everyone to the webinar. It's really a pleasure to co-host this webinar with the MECS team, and I'm really excited for the dialogue to come. This is Aimee Jenks from the GPA Secretariat, and I'm here just to brief us kind of on the main challenges that we're facing. So through the GPA, we have defined 5 key challenges that are impeding kind of the humanitarian sector to integrate sustainable energy into their programs and operations, which are on the slide. So a few more words about those. On the coordination side, we really see this movement in the humanitarian sector to market-based and sustainable approaches to integrating energy services for displaced people and host communities. But we also still see this typical kind of distribution of cook stoves or fuel to displaced populations. So we think kind of planning and coordination on the site level is really critical for the integration of modern energy cooking services to really be realized on the practical level. On kind of the policy and finance levels, we see that kind of cooking energy and electrification policies are not integrated. So there's really a need for a change in mindset so we can be able to set that enabling environment on the policy and finance side to have these integrated approaches to modern energy cooking services. As well in the humanitarian system, the kind of funding cycles are around 1 year, and it takes longer than that to build a market ecosystem for MECS. So there's also a kind of longer funding horizon needed on the finance side. On the expertise side, it's quite clear that the humanitarian sector are focused on mandates of protection and education and wash and shelter, and they're not energy experts per se. So we do face a limited expertise internally in the sector to know who the right energy actors are and how to kind of manage energy programs. And then last but not least, on the data and evidence side, we don't have enough in-depth assessments on the site level to really inform energy programs and inform what modern energy cooking services would be feasible for displacement settings and to really meet the needs of the displaced and host communities. So that's kind of the overall challenge, a few pointers on the issues that we're facing, and I think it really highlights the need for this type of research that the MECS program is doing. So I'm really looking forward to the dialogue, and we'll pass over to Iwona for the rest of the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you to Seng and Aimee. Let's move on. Before I dive in, just a quick note that in our landscape analysis and in this presentation, the term modern energy cooking or clean cooking refers only to ESMAP's Tier 4 and 5 of the multi-tier framework, where Tier 0 is no access and Tier 5 is the highest level of access. The so-called BLEANS category, made up of biogas, LPG, ethanol, electricity, natural gas and solar, meaning non-biomass technology. Displacement settings can be profiled using three main characteristics: geographical locations, for example camps, peri-urban or urban areas, scales, household or community level, and also spatial timeframes, humanitarian emergencies versus protracted crisis. These profiles affect the type of responses a cooking intervention is likely to require. There is a diversity of settings, of course, including rural areas and camps and urban and peri-urban contexts, and we fully acknowledge that the distinction between rural and peri-urban is often blurred, and that this is not a binary cluster, but a spectrum of settings and therefore experiences. Likewise, camps are not always located in rural areas and can therefore have different energy access opportunities and experience different sets of barriers. Household level and community scale cooking require very different fuel quantities and likely technologies which best suit the needs. Energy access in emergency response will also differ from protracted crisis, where the former will, for example, be less likely to be eligible for more permanent or long-term solutions as opposed to the latter. Here we're showing some of the critical factors that can drive or hinder progress in transitions to clean, modern cooking in displacement settings. Policy, finance, and coordination really are critical. If there is no enabling policy environment, access to finance, and good level of coordination among the many stakeholders operating in displacement settings, progress on extending modern energy access runs a risk of being hindered. For example, in the analysis of MECS alternative fuels for Rohingya refugees, the Bangladeshi government did not permit solar PV solutions as most host communities did not have this technology. The enabling policies don't just concern energy access, but the status of refugees, which impacts on their ability to move, procure services, access employment, and so on. They are quite progressive in some countries, for example in Uganda, and less so in others, like in Kenya. We know that many displaced people have limited access to finance. Solutions such as pay-as-you-go energy and support mechanisms for the suppliers, such as results-based financing and concessions, can help make energy services more affordable. Again, policies such as right to employment or land ownership can boost financial capacity and make energy services more accessible, which helps move away from free handouts, which have shown mixed results in terms of sustainability. They have also distorted local markets to the detriment of both the displaced and host communities' energy access. Poor coordination creates an environment hard to navigate for all, but can particularly be detrimental to attracting interest from those keen to provide energy services in displacement settings. Initiatives such as efforts dosed by Global Plan of Action can make a big difference in helping coordinate, align, connect, and map out stakeholders, projects, and programs happening across the different displacement settings. Now on to the technology side of things. As you can see here, between 1983 and 2015, there were 133 energy projects in humanitarian settings identified by the Global Alliance of Clean Cookstoves, now known as the Clean Cooking Alliance. Out of the 133 projects, 59 are or were situated in or within 10 kilometers from the 15 MECS priority countries. Cooking interventions have predominantly focused on improving biomass combustion, and only one project involved the use of modern energy cooking, the Gaia Foundation Ethanol Project in 3 refugee camps in Jijiga, Ethiopia. However, since 2015, there has been a significant shift in humanitarian response to the cooking crisis, with 5 LPG and some electric cooking projects in displacement settings in MECS focus countries. For example, the LPG project in Nyarugusu refugee camp in Tanzania. What technologies are used depends, of course, on what's available and whether, for example, there is any existing infrastructure and established supply chains. The steep decline in solar PV energy costs also enables the use of services such as e-cooking in refugee camps, very few of which actually have a grid connection at the household level and therefore have to rely on alternatives. When thinking about technologies, we also have to be aware of cultural factors, such as the different types of foods cooked among different groups of refugees and other displaced. For example, a corn porridge typical to South Sudanese cuisine will require different cooking utensils and time frames than making injera, which is common in Ethiopian and Eritrean cuisines. We also demonstrate some examples from Rwanda and Bangladesh to show how those differences play out on the ground. Linked to that, knowing what food-related provisions or allowances exist in the different displacement settings, and particularly in refugee camps, is also important, as it gives us an idea on what types of foods are most commonly cooked, what the potential capacity to pay may be, and how the displaced cooked, or rather with what, based on the kitchen sets available. However, judging by cash-based transfers and voucher amounts for affordability or willingness to pay is not always representative, as other factors also come into play, such as, for example, income, where it's possible, and remittances or other support sources. So where do we see some of the most promising potential for MECS? Community-scale kitchens, for example, in schools, have a high potential to transition, as they are already spending a lot on cooking fuel or fuels, and many also have at least some level of electricity access. Hybrid solutions, such as LPG and e-cooking, could be a viable option there. Displaced populations in urban areas, given access to markets and again access to electricity, at least to some extent, are also of interest. In camp settings where LPG infrastructure is already in place and either solar PV is installed or there is some level of grid access, such as, for example, in Azraq's Atari refugee camps in Jordan. As our research at MECS in various case studies in non-humanitarian settings has shown, cooking with electricity is already very attractive and frequently cheaper than cooking with fuels, such as charcoal or firewood, where firewood is not freely available. You can read more in the recently released report, Cooking with Electricity, a Cost Perspective, which was led by our colleagues at MECS and ESMAP. Now, where do we see less potential? Probably in rural and remote camps without any existing infrastructure. Those are settings where transitioning to MECS will take much more effort and time. While we are not discarding them, we see them as perhaps higher hanging fruits than urban settings or community scale cooking. Moving on to the role of stakeholders. It is important to acknowledge that numerous organizations and institutions are active in the humanitarian energy space. While in the depiction of the humanitarian cluster system, you can notice that energy doesn't have a specific cluster focus, it does appear under the priorities of various institutions addressing those individual clusters. Energy access is seen as an enabler. For example, WFP and FAO include energy as part of their focus on food, and in the case of the IOM, migration. Under the Clean Energy Challenge and as part of the Global Strategy for Sustainable Energy, UNHCR's goal is to enable refugees, host communities, and other persons of concern to meet their energy needs in a safe and sustainable manner. However, as energy access has been somewhat neglected in the humanitarian spheres until relatively recently, the result is a dearth of data on energy access in those settings. As many of you might know, the GPA are working on addressing this gap by bringing stakeholders together, harmonizing energy access indicators, and finding ways to combine efforts towards building robust data collection and analysis mechanisms to inform design of energy access delivery models and projects. MECS have an opportunity to participate and support those efforts by continuing to raise awareness of critical issues the sector is still facing, producing and disseminating evidence, and supporting technical advisory and capacity building based on the wealth of experience built through the wider MECS program across the 15 focus countries. And finally, on to the policies and financial models, which have already been mentioned at various points early in the presentation. We focus on two types of policies. First, policies regarding the displaced populations. One of the big steps towards bringing the displaced agenda to the international fora was the Global Compact on Refugees, signed in 2018, which aims to ease pressure on host countries and also enhance refugee self-reliance. One of the keys to this framework is the mandate for humanitarian organizations to work not only with refugees, but also with host communities. That inclusive approach is also very important for us at MECS. On the left-hand side, you can see some of the indicators which we have looked at to evaluate some of our focus countries to understand what that enabling policy environment is, and therefore where it would be best for MECS to focus on. The full analysis is available in the report which we have shared with you. Then there are policies specifically concerning energy access in settings of displacement. Among the 15 MECS priority countries, very few actually have them, as refugees are often seen as the responsibility of UNHCR, and hence national policies do not include them. However, cases such as Kenya, where policies on climate action do include energy-related goals, such as the reduction in the use of biomass, or Malawi, where the government have set up a task force for the 2 million cleaner cookstoves for Malawi, and together with UNHCR have set up a roadmap for the implementation of the Comprehensive Refugee Response Framework, show that there are ways to integrate this challenge into the national priorities and energy access efforts. And finally, we come to the question of financing, where there is also a gap. Most of the funding for energy access in settings of displacement today has primarily relied on grants. This is partly due to the fact that those settings have fallen under the humanitarian and emergency response, and only recently there's been a push to move away from the donation model to one where the displaced can choose more sustainable energy services that better suits their needs, especially in protracted crisis situations which do require a different approach to a sudden onset context. Among some of the other financial mechanisms that have been tested and replicated, at least to some extent, in displacement settings have been results-based financing schemes and concessions, although the latter are yet to be fully implemented. A lot of attention is currently going to more innovative tools, such as carbon financing, which has been used, for example, in Chad under the Cook It Solar Cooker project serving Sudanese refugees. As modern energy cooking services do help reduce carbon emissions, there is potentially a significant opportunity for such schemes to help finance the clean, modern cooking transitions for the displaced across different settings. I will now present the identified research priorities which stem from the landscape study that we have conducted over the last few months. The 5 identified research priorities for MECS include urban and peri-urban displacement, community facilities and humanitarian institutions, financing in displacement settings going beyond grants, quality data, given the scarcity of it, and at the heart of it, inclusive models, where we look at displaced populations, but also host communities. In addition, when we think about inclusiveness at MECS, we think about including marginalized groups such as the disabled, but also including women and youth to truly leave no one behind. We also think about an inclusive approach towards MECS in displacement by sort of integrating electricity access and energy for cooking, as these two are very much complementary, and we would like to address them holistically. In terms of the urban and peri-urban displacement, the opportunity that we see there is that despite not knowing very much about the displaced in urban centers, we know that they do tend to have better access to existing infrastructure, for example, access to electricity and also existing fuel supply chains. We'd like to evaluate stakeholder harmonization for energy interventions, and also look into business models and financing schemes that can facilitate scale-up of access to MECS where it already exists. Community facilities and humanitarian institutions, of course, present an interesting opportunity, as we have discussed earlier in the presentation, due to the already significant spend on cooking fuels, the scale of cooking, and also their access to infrastructure and fuel supply. For example, access to electricity is higher in schools in various displacement settings than it is at a household level. We very much want to collaborate with humanitarian partners on facilitating those transitions, and one of such collaborations is our existing partnerships with WFP, where we're looking at MECS solutions for cooking under the school feeding program. Financing MECS in displacement settings is no small feat, and we would like to better understand what innovative financing mechanisms and financial inclusion opportunities exist, and what lessons learned could we apply to the displacement settings from the work that we've conducted under the MECS umbrella in non-displacement settings. And that hopefully will allow us to unlock investments on cooking appliances, including electric cooking appliances. Regarding data, as we mentioned, there's currently still a scarcity of it. So we would like to further support the work of the GPA towards harmonizing energy indicators, and also facilitating data sharing and analysis, and really building quality, robust data sets. So we're also looking to conduct our own data collection, which we hope will feed into those processes. That's all from me for today. I will now hand over to Owen for some concluding remarks. Thank you so much all for listening.
So yeah, thank you very much for inviting me to say a few words. It's really, really encouraging to see all of the great framing and landscape work that has gone into MECS so far. I think you've clearly diagnosed the issues and the barriers comprehensively, and it's really great to see the focus of the opportunities and the research priorities, which I think are throwing up some really exciting avenues for further exploration. All of the quadrants of the last slide are important, and I think they offer good opportunities for MECS to add value and to make a difference in this sector. I guess in particular, I'm keen to hear more about your work and thinking regarding the two segments on the left, so the kind of urban, peri-urban work and the data picture. As everyone knows, I'm really passionate about the idea of the humanitarian sector becoming better aligned on energy data management and collection, and I guess the next year or 18 months will probably be pretty critical in terms of setting up longer term ways of working in that space. So it's really good you're focusing on that. I think it's also good that you've identified the urban and peri-urban displaced people as a focus, since I guess from what I've seen, they are often excluded from big research agendas like this. And I think it probably ties in with some of the economic analysis of where MECS will ultimately be most attractive to deploy as well. So anyway, just interested you're focusing there. I guess the only other thing that I wanted to talk about was just from my perspective at Chatham House, I'm really looking forward to seeing your plan for policy impact. I keep saying this to people, but at the risk of being boring, there's more interest in the humanitarian energy space than ever before. There's more money from funders, there's more programmatic resources being devoted to staff and thinking by the big agencies like UNHCR and WFP and others, and there's more research happening. So I guess this is a really exciting time to be working on this agenda. And I think you brought a wave of interest and enthusiasm to the cooking discussion that was really sorely needed. So yeah, I'm looking forward to hearing and hopefully chatting with you guys about how you're going to be making sure that humanitarians hear about and digest your work, whether that's through trainings or workshopping or conferencing or spreading the word in other ways. Anyway, good luck and thank you very much.